Are we on?
Yep, and we're recording.
All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Jonathan Roberts, and this is our third in a series on C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia. For today, we are talking about Prince Caspian. This is the second in the order of books that Lewis wrote in the Chronicles of Narnia, published 1951. And just a small little point of trivia, you probably can't see it, but this is the only book with a subhead, Prince Caspian, The Return to Narnia. It's kind of funny if you're going to embrace Lewis trivia, which I tend to do. He always had different titles for these books, and this is a book that he fought long and hard, didn't particularly care for the name Prince Caspian, and so they allowed him to have a subtitle, The Return to Narnia, which is what his original title for the book would have been, but the editors always pushed back on him. In any case, today I'm going to mention all the topics that I am going to talk about, because if I didn't plan ahead, you would think this was a totally random walk in the park. So with that as preamble, I want to talk a little bit about other frameworks for Narnia, what scholars have talked and the themes that they've tried to overlay. I'm going to jump into the Abolition of Man a little bit, because there is the Tao, essentially, or the Tao or the natural philosophy that it goes throughout Narnia. And so I think it's interesting to touch a little bit on the Abolition of Man, a book that Lewis wrote that was really not necessarily a Christian work, more of a humanist work related to central truths that are throughout Lewis. Then I'm going to go to Lewis, his own writing on stories, so we can kind of step back and put Narnia within the context of Lewis's own words. And then we will go to Prince Caspian itself. I've gone through the book and have a few quotations that I want to highlight and comment on the stories. So, and you may wonder, how in the world are we going to do all this? It does seem very random. I accept the challenge. So first, in terms of other frameworks, this is a book called, I'm doing what Dwight told me to do. I'm doing the Pause Planet Narnia, actually written by a priest, and the thesis of it is that one of the frameworks of Lewis's work is related to the planetary system, sort of a medieval construct. I'm not going to go into that today because it's a little complicated, and honestly, I want to spend more time with the book. The first thing I would note is Lewis's work. I mentioned this last week that Tolkien never particularly cared for the Narnia series, and according to George Sayre, who was one of Lewis's great biographers and close friend. Actually, Gard, you see the George Sayre book somewhere on the floor there? Oh, here it is, right here. I had planned for this. George Sayre wrote this book, Jack, and had he was not really an inkling. He was about 20 years younger than Lewis, but a lot of people corresponded with him. And according to Sayre, reports that Tolkien, quote, strongly detested Lewis's assembling figures from various mythologies. He also thought they were carelessly and superficially written. So it's kind of funny, right? Lewis loved everything Tolkien wrote, and Tolkien, by and large, never reciprocated his affection. And it could be that he envied Lewis's fluency and just how quickly he wrote and how much he wrote. But it is also interesting that Lewis, there's a great quote from this book that says, one does not need to have a deep acquaintance with the contours of Lewis's mind to know that randomness is not a characteristic feature of it. And Lewis, in his own writings, wrote, "Intricacy is a mark of the medieval mind." Lewis considered himself a medievalist. And when he actually went to Cambridge, his opening lecture at Cambridge was that people should study him as sort of a specimen from the medieval age. That if they wanted to know what a medieval man was, they could study C.S. Lewis and they would know that. So the notion that that Lewis was haphazard, even though he wrote quickly, is not accurate. Lewis, did almost all of his quotations and references from memory. He read every book from the 16th century in the library at Oxford. He did not do things casually. So, but these works have been evaluated and reviewed and most importantly read. So let me just read a couple of the different constructs that people have had for Lewis's work. One is that it's on the 7 Catholic sacraments. Another view is it's a commentary on the 7 deadly sins. Another view is that it's on the theological virtues of love, faith, and hope. And the last 4 to the cardinal virtues. Another view that it's a special imaginative relationship between his book, Mere Christianity, and the images and stories of Narnia. And some people have done a lot of biblical references back and forth between Narnia and, of course, the Bible. And so some people view it all through a reflection of just Christology, just the study of Christ, and through the figure of Aslan. So, it's interesting. There's literally been dozens of books written on Narnia and interpretation of it. And one that I think is actually quite good for those parents that are now reading Narnia to your kids. This book is actually very readable, and it goes through the characters and shows biblical references and sort of frames it as questions that you can ask your kids, engage them in dialogue. And the beauty of Narnia is it gives you a framework to talk to your kids about things. So if you go up to Amazon Prime, this will probably cost you about $2. So go up and order this book if you're walking through the Narnia series with your kids. And what I found is that Lewis wrote Narnia to, quote, baptize their imagination, so that when they encountered some of the notions of Christianity, they would have a framework to sort of understand it. And we're going to go through some of that framework today. But, the big questions, what happens after you die? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why isn't, if Christ is real, why isn't he more apparent in a sort of a physical sense? All these questions can't be categorically answered, but you can have a frame of reference within Narnia to do it that is approachable to the kids. So that is something that I would mention if you want to look at various books and various references. I am going to spend a little bit more time with Planet Narnia and try to get into sort of that frame of reference, because I think it's kind of fun. And now I'm going to go to the Abolition of Man and highlight a few things from this book related to natural law. So this is a book that after you've read Mere Christianity 2 times, you should then go and tackle the Abolition of Man. And in it, Lewis, it's not really a Christian work. It's a work more of natural law. He talks about fundamental truths that connect all religions and traditions. And so let me read from this book, because it's this sense of essential truth that is apparent throughout all of Narnia. So he's talking about the Tao, the T-A-O. And I apologize if I've mispronounced that. This conception in all its forms, Platonic, Aristotelian, Stoic, Christian, and Oriental alike, I shall henceforth refer to, for brevity, simply as the Tao, the Tao. Some of the accounts of it, which I have quoted, will seem perhaps to many of you merely a quaint or even magical. But here's the key point. But what is common to all of them is something we cannot neglect. It is the doctrine of objective value, the belief that certain attitudes are really true and others really false to the kind of thing the universe is and the kind of things we are. And so further down, it is to recognize a quality which demands a certain response from us, whether we make it or not. And so further down, and because our approvals and disapprovals are thus recognitions of objective value or responses to an objective order, therefore emotional states can be in harmony with reason. So he is talking about external truth. And
no, it's not on our side. It's on.
did Jad go down?
Yeah, it's on the other side.
Do you want to call Jad?
Let me see if I can.
I see you. Now they can hear us. Okay, can they see us? Let's start video. You cannot start video because the host has stopped it.
Call Chad.
We are back, kind of. Well, if you can hear me, but not see me, that's probably good. Let's just proceed. And hopefully we'll get video back in a second.
Elizabeth just texted Chad.
We hear you. Okay. Well, the only thing I can be entirely thankful of is that I didn't swear much. So let's proceed, and at some point we will get video back. So this is a great, I think, do we still have video? The screen's moving around. You're controlling me over there, is that right, Gar?
No.
Okay. Anyway, we make men without chest and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings to be fruitful. So men without chest, men and women without a sense of value, purpose, notion of truth. That is a key Lewis concept. Further in the book, The thing which I have called the convenience, for convenience, the Tao, and which others may call natural law or traditional morality, or the first principles of practical reason. So this is a huge concept that Lewis had, which is this notion of external truth. And I'm now flipping to another book that I would show you if in fact we had video, but we don't. It's a book on Lewis and basically the philosophy of Lewis. Lewis actually originally at Oxford taught philosophy, so he was well versed in philosophy. So if we go against the notion of the natural law, what we have is Nietzsche. And so he famously wrote, God is dead, and that the loss of God has left us sailing in a vast uncharted sea with no recognizable ethical landmarks to steer by. And he had noted that without God, we're essentially going to ruin and doom. Without God, people can no longer rationally believe that truth or morality is objective. We have abolished the real world. Not surprisingly, he committed suicide. But that is sort of the concept that Lewis is fighting against, this nihilism. And he was standing up for this notion of external truth throughout time. And this was, not consistent with the way the world worked. That is why, Pilate, when Christ said, I'm telling the truth, Pilate is, what is truth? It is not a concept that has been accepted throughout time. So now I am switching. I'm sorry we don't have video because I honestly really wish I could be showing you books, but assumedly, once the host, which I think is Jad, arrives, we might be able to get video back. But assumedly you're still hearing me. And is there any indication that people are hearing me, or am I, per usual, just talking to myself?
No, everybody's still there.
Okay, good. So now I'm going to a couple quotes from On Stories, and this is a set of essays that Lewis wrote on stories and literature, and it tells you how Lewis thinks about things. So there's a great quote in here in the preamble. In 1937, Tolkien recalled Lewis said to me, Tollers, that's what he called Tolkien, there is too little of what we really like in stories. I'm afraid we shall have to write them ourselves. And so that is why Lewis, launched forth in writing these. Lewis also, keep in mind, wrote a lot of science fiction. He wrote the Science Trilogy about a decade before he wrote these books. And he wrote, to construct plausible and moving, quote, other worlds, you must draw on the only real other world we know, that of the spirit. So it's interesting, right? By extracting all of the familiar, you're forcing us to go to our other senses. You're forcing us to align with our own spiritual sense. But that said, later in this chapter on stories, the logic of a fairy tale is as strict as the realistic novel, though different. So it still has to have logic. It can't jump and not be coherent, but by removing the familiar, it allows us to deal with things. And you'll notice in Lewis's writing, the notion of smell, scent, and most importantly, sound. Remember, Aslan sings the world into being. Lucy in Caspian hears the trees. The other senses are at play. It is not just the mind. And now here, further on in the book, I am getting to, this is the book On Stories. This is why Lewis writes for children. Okay, here we go. To be concerned about being a grown-up, to admire the grown-up because it is grown up, to blush at the suspicion of being childish. These things are marks of childhood and adolescence. And in childhood and adolescence, they are, in moderation, healthy symptoms. Young things ought to want to grow, but to carry into middle life or even into early manhood, this concern about what being an adult is a mark of really arrested development. When I was 10, here's the famous quote, "When I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I am 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up." And then the next point further down, "They accuse us of arrested development because we have not lost a taste we had in childhood." So Lewis turns it on its head and goes back at you to say to be an adult is to embrace what childhood is. And so that's just a fabulous thing. So now a couple quotes from the book, and then we'll go to Q&A. Even if we don't have video, I even fixed my collar for this very thing that I thought I would be viewed. So flipping through Prince Caspian, these are just my little yellow stickies. When the dwarf Trumpkin gets thrown over and he gets saved, quote, "We are in a kind of rebellion." Of course, this is going against the evil Uncle Miraz. And it's interesting, rebellion, I'm simply going to key that that's what he referred to as Christians in Mere Christianity, that they were in a rebellion against the common state. That's what's happening here in this book. The true Narnians are in a rebellion against the common state. So it's similar construct to what Lewis had in Our Reality and Mere Christianity. And then, of course, a big theme of the book is about what is truth and what is reality. And so obviously we have the nurse that tells Lewis these stories. That is actually modeled after his own childhood nurse, Lizzie Undercut. And so, which she, towards the end of the book, is of course found and returned to Caspian by Aslan himself. So that's just a fabulous thing. But the king really did not like the fact that he was hearing these old stories. So, quote, "That's all nonsense for babies," said the king sternly. This is his uncle, so he's not really a king. "Only fit for babies. Do you hear? You're getting too old for that sort of stuff." So echoes of the statements we just heard about adults not liking to hear what children's hear, what children's stories. And so he did not later on, Caspian is starting to get the inkling that there might be truth beyond what his uncle had told him. So, later on, "Do you mean," he gasped, "that there are other things? Do you mean it was like in the stories? Were there?" "Hush," said Dr. Cornelius. So Dr. Cornelius, we later learn, is both half man and half dwarf. And so then Caspian asked, what can he do? We asked his friend and tutor what he can do, Dr. Cornelius. And this is what Cornelius says: "You can be kind to the poor remnants of the dwarf people like myself. You can gather learned magicians and try to find a way of awakening the trees once more. You can search through all the nooks and wild places of the land to see if any fauns or talking beasts or dwarfs are perhaps still alive." And so notice that Caspian is given something to do. We then have the great Caspian has to flee. Miraz has a son so that Caspian can be killed and he can take over the kingdom. He encounters the dwarfs when he gets knocked off the horse. And so really the theme throughout is, do you believe in Aslan? And that's of course what Caspian says. "Do you believe in Aslan?" says Caspian to Nicobrick. "I'll believe in anything, anyone or anything," says that dwarf. Basically, he's making the claim, "An enemy of my enemy is my friend." And of course, Trumpkin, the other dwarf that he encounters, who was ultimately thrown over the side of the boat and discovered by the children that have returned to Narnia, does not believe either. So this is a story of belief. We then go further in the book, and Dr. Cornelius says, it's time to blow the horn, and this is a great, window in how Aslan works. We do not know from what form the help will take. It might call Aslan from overseas, but I think it is more likely to call Peter, the High King, and his mighty consorts down from the high past. But in either case, I do not think we can be sure that the help will come to this very spot. So Cornelius, very wise, half man, half dwarf, knows that Aslan works through others. And now to really the most famous section, and then I'll take questions, even though I still don't have video.
So it's a Zoom glitch.
It's a Zoom glitch. Okay, so we can't throw anybody under the bus except Zoom, which is also hackable by the Chinese. So maybe it's their fault. Who knows? But let's move on. All these systems have been crashing like mad because there's just so much demand on them. So I'll even give Zoom a break. So the most famous section, if you read any of the biographies on Lewis and any of the analysis related to Prince Caspian, the section that is consistently referenced is Lucy seeing Aslan again. Look, 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 cried Lucy. Where? What? Asked everyone. The lion, said Lucy. Aslan himself. Didn't you see? Her face had changed completely and her eyes shone. And then they doubt Lucy, of course. And then Lucy says, don't talk like a grown-up, said Lucy, stamping her foot. I didn't think I saw him. I saw him. And then, of course, the children don't believe. Peter, Susan, Edmund, nobody believes. And then Lucy says, I just know, said Lucy, by his face. The others looked at each other in puzzled silence. So now, obviously, this goes back to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when Lucy was not believed then. But think about it. Now, all the children have seen Aslan. They've been transported back to Narnia through when they were in a London train station. And she was absolutely correct before, but they still don't believe her. So frankly, bad on the kids. But I know he was, said Lucy, her eyes filling with tears. But the other kids don't see, so they don't believe her. Except, now this is the interesting thing, Edmund, of course, Edmund is the bad guy in the first book, the one that ate Turkish delight and the person that betrayed Aslan and the children and all that kind of stuff. In Narnia history, he becomes Edmund the Just. He is a radically transformed character. And so it is Edmund that ultimately comes to her defense. Well, there's just this, said Edmund, speaking quickly and turning a little red. When we first discovered Narnia a year ago, or 1,000 years ago, whichever it is, it was Lucy who discovered it first, and none of us would believe her. I was the worst of the lot, I know, yet she was right after all. Wouldn't it be fair to believe her this time? I vote for going up. And so, isn't that just beautiful? That it is now Edmund that comes to the defense of Lucy, and it is Edmund that helps steer things towards believing Lucy. Lucy then hears Aslan. The kids, initially don't believe and they take the wrong path. Aslan then appears again, and she hears the voice of Aslan through the trees. The call again, slowly through the trees, and she tries to tune it in. And then she sees Aslan. When they looked like trees, it was like a strangely human trees. And then later, for he was there, the huge lion shining in white in the moonlight with his huge black underneath him. And now, one of the great lines of Lewis. Welcome, child, he said. Aslan, said Lucy, you're bigger. That is because you are older, little one, answered he. Isn't that fabulous? She can see more of Aslan because she is older. He is always who he is. And then Lucy wants to know what would have happened. Another great Lewis theme. To know what would have happened, child, said Aslan. No, nobody is ever told that. And then Aslan sends her back to the kids that hadn't believed her. Do you mean that that is what you want me to do? So notice Aslan doesn't, go in and rescue. He forces her to step up and do what she needs to do. And Aslan answers, yes, little one. And it is hard for you, little one, a couple pages later, but things never happen the same way twice. It has been hard for all of us in Narnia before now. And then she buried her head in his mane to hide from his face, but there must have been magic in his mane. She could feel lion strength going into her. Quite suddenly, she sat up. I'm sorry, Aslan, she said. I am ready now. And off she goes. And then, of course, she returns. Edmund believes her, and they follow Lucy, and Aslan leads them to where they need to go to connect with Caspian and go on their adventures throughout. But, Susan in this story is always made out as kind of the bad practical one. And the beautiful thing is that when Aslan ultimately confronts all the children, he commends Edmund for believing Lucy and tells, well done, Edmund. And he forgives Susan, and he encourages Peter. And then he even goes to Trumpkin and says, son of earth, shall we be friends? Asked Aslan. I mean, echoes of knock and the door shall be open, right? The choice, of course, is Trumpkin's. And Aslan has a bit of truth for everyone. He even goes to Reepicheep, who is just this fabulous mouse who plays a very prominent role in the next book, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And so, and actually, just a quick aside, which of course is what I'm generally known for, quick asides, Reepicheep and Puddleglum were Lewis's two personal favorites. Something he mentioned to Walter Hooper. So Reepicheep is just this fabulous, courageous little mouse. And Lewis says, I have sometimes wondered, friend, said Aslan, whether you do not think too much of your honor. Isn't that fabulous? Even Reepicheep, this fabulous, courageous character, finally gets dealt with. And then the last point I would make on the book is that at the end, obviously, the Telmarines have taken over Narnia, have pushed the Narnians out. They're overcome through the battle scene and through Peter doing, one-on-one combat with the terrible Uncle Miraz. And so Aslan doesn't vanquish them. He opens up a door and allows them to return to their own country. So there is this incredible graciousness throughout the book, which, frankly, I think is a great Lewis trait, going back to some of the sections I read from the Abolition of Man. He's very open to other traditions and other philosophies. And even in this case, the folks that, not by their own misdeed, other than their leadership, had taken over Narnia, he even cares for them. And so those are some of the things I wanted to reference in Narnia and Caspian. And I'm sorry that we lost video because of Zoom. Maybe we'll switch to GoToMeeting or something that works. Who knows? Teams, they all crash in this time. And I've been working actively with all of them. So it just is a fact of our new life. So Gar, do we have some questions?
Yeah, okay, so the first one I think you did discuss, Aslan, you are bigger, to which Aslan responds, that is because you are older, little one. What is he trying to say this? But I think you answered that one.
Yeah, I mean, this was the question of Lucy being able to see more of Aslan. And I do think I tried to answer that anyway, which is the extent to which the children can see Aslan is really upon them, right? It's Lucy that always sees Aslan. She is purest of heart. She is the most loyal. So throughout, it's almost always Lucy who sees Aslan first, and then Edmund. The determining factor of seeing Aslan is left to the children in many ways, not Aslan, because Aslan is there. There's this great scene in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which we'll read this week and then I'll speak to next week, where Lucy is upstairs in the magician's house, and she does the spell and Aslan appears, and she says, "Aslan, you're here." And Aslan basically says, "Child, I've been here the whole time." And so there is this wonderful notion that Aslan is there, and their ability to see him is more on them than Aslan. So there's a little bit of a connection there.
It's interesting. It's on Trump. There's actually two Trumpkin questions. Trumpkin says, "Who believes in Aslan nowadays? What does this represent in C.S. Lewis's time?"
So the question was Trumpkin, challenging who believes in Aslan in this time. That's why in my own haphazard way, I started with the Abolition of Man, right? Because that book is speaking to this, quote, age of reason that Lewis was living in and that we're living in now, which is, it's amazing how things stay the same. Every age thinks that they're so radical and new and they figured this thing out and everything in the past is gone because, now we have the internet or whatever the case may be. But it's really all kind of the same stuff, that there is this view that rational thought dissuades you from this belief in things beyond ourselves, period, stop. And so that's why Lewis, with the Abolition of Man, said, let's just start with the natural law. You don't have to buy into Christianity. Can we just start with there's some external truth beyond ourselves? And that is what Trumpkin is failing to understand and to embrace. And so that is very relevant to our age, because I think that is still going on now. And to tie back to my earlier comment, if you don't believe in some moral law or natural law beyond yourself, you become men and women without chess, men and women without a sense of virtue or center or truth or moral code, because nature abhors a vacuum, and that vacuum is filled by your own pursuit and by pride and basically societal decline and destruction.
I think this one is on that same dovetail, but why does Trumpkin continue to doubt the old Narnian legends even after seeing proof?
Why does Trumpkin continue to doubt the Narnian legends even after seeing proof? Well, this goes back to one of the more perplexing sections in the book of Acts, right? So we know that after Christ rose from the dead, he appeared to many, many people, and the great line is, he appeared to all these people and many of them believed. I've always thought, if he appeared to me, I would believe. I mean, that would be declarative. But it's just this throwaway line that Christ appeared to many and many of them believed. That is to say, belief is a really, really hard thing. And so I think Trumpkin represents, sort of that sense of doubt that was reflected in the book of Acts. And in a sense, we have doubting Thomas, who was the other, even more antagonistic dwarf, I'm trying to remember the dwarf's name, but anyway, you know who it is. Anyway, you have all these characters on this varying range or spectrum of doubt and how they come to belief, with Lucy being the most connected, probably actually Cornelius, if we're going to go into the Narnians and the dwarfs, but you have this range of receptivity towards Aslan. And that's the great thing. The great thing about Lewis is his ability to have gradation of characters. They're not all the same. Everybody in their own nuanced way is trying to figure out how to deal with this notion of Aslan.
All right, last question. The old Narnians were suddenly rebels. Is there a modern American example of old Narnians being rebels?
Yeah, the old Narnians are rebels, and that's why I went to that in my first quotation in the book, uh, the rebel part, and I drew the connection to Lewis and Mere Christianity, basically talking about Christianity in the 1940s in England being a rebellion. He talked about Christians being in, quote, enemy territory, where they are, fighting essentially the cultural norms of the time. And, and the point being that, frankly, Christianity has always been at its best when it's been a minority effort, when it has been in rebellion territory, because when it becomes the dominant cultural norm, then it leads to abuse, like all human institutions do. So I would say that today, it very much culturally is within the minority sect, and so it's completely consistent. Those of us that believe and believe that Aslan is on the move are very much in the minority. And so in that sense, we should take comfort that we're the old Narnians.
Yeah. 2 minutes to wrap up.
Okay, well, we're surprisingly on time, and I dressed up today. I'm really bummed that we don't have the video. Gar and I tidied the office up. It's just totally unfair that we've lost the video, but hopefully you've stuck with us with just the audio. So thank you for that. One thing I would highlight is these talks are up on the Epiphany Parish YouTube channel. We've still got to load the one from 2 weeks ago that's opening of Narnia. This talk will be loaded, but more importantly, and I think much more interestingly, there have been a number of members of the parish who have done readings of the Chronicles of Narnia. They have done all of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and most of Caspian. And so, in a sense, I want to encourage all of us to spread the word. We'll create a link from the main site to the YouTube channel, and hopefully we'll package up these links in a way that you can attach it to your social media. But I think at this time when we're all shut in, now is the time for young and old to spend a little time in Narnia. Read the books yourselves, listen to the wonderful readings that are just really, really good up on the website. Perhaps listen, if not watch, these lectures and share them with your friends. And let's seize this as perhaps a silver lining in this really terrible time to go to the land of Narnia. It seems oddly appropriate because I think all of us feel like we're living in the Twilight Zone. And so the step into Narnia from where we are maybe isn't as great as it would have been during the busy and bustle of our lives just 4 weeks ago. So take a half step, move into Narnia, encounter Aslan in new and interesting ways, find yourself in the characters of Edmund, Peter, and Lucy, and all the others, and it sees this as perhaps one of the good bright spots of what is otherwise not such a good time. Next week is Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and this is really a great book. And I would strongly encourage you to read it. I am really looking forward to talking about it next week. It has 2 or 3 of my favorite vignettes of all of the Narnia series. And it is first and foremost, as Lewis would say, despite all of this framing and context that I tried to provide earlier, first and foremost, Lewis strove to tell a good story. And The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is truly a great, great story. So read it, enjoy it, and we will discuss it. And you might even see, I'm going to be all stressed about my wardrobe for next week and the event that you're able to see me. But keep safe, keep well. Thank you for spending some time with us this morning, and have a good day. Thanks. Bye-bye.